Hey everybody, welcome into episode 26 of my YouTube journey. Tonight, we're going to tackle a story that most of you probably heard of. Some of you probably know more about it than I do, but I've done a deep dive trying to make this interesting and put it on film and let my storytelling work. And so tonight, we're going to talk about the Black Sox scandal. It's really interesting. There's a lot of different facets to it. There's double crosses. There's people doing wrong, saying they didn't do wrong, lying. It's got all the things in one of those stories that make it interesting. But tonight, when we look at this, you got to put things into the time frame it was in. You got to realize when you go back in time and you look at things that happen, you can't look at it through today's lens. You've got to look at it through the lens of the day they lived in. And this is a prime example of that. Major League Baseball wasn't what it is today. Nowadays, with guys making $25-30 million a year, they're not throwing any games. Why would they? Why would they put their livelihood in jeopardy, especially when they're that rich and wealthy? Well, back then, those guys, they weren't like that. There were some guys that made, Ty Cobbs and the Eddie Collins and people like that made way above what a normal citizen would make, but some of them wasn't in that stratosphere. And then they also knew that a lot of the guys, they weren't well educated. So when they got done with baseball, they were going to work menial tasks the rest of their life. So they were trying to make hay while they could. And unfortunately, some of them would make bad decisions from time to time. So that was the lens, and that's where they were. Gambling back then was huge in baseball. Fenway Park and Wrigley Field and places like that, the Polo Grounds, they had groups, sections that were nothing but people there gambling, just out in the open gambling. They would call players over before the game started when they were getting loose and kind of talk to them. But the owners in Major League Baseball knew what was going on. They were offering these dudes bribes. They would say stuff, it was like prop bets. When you get up, for your second time of the game, I'm going to bet that you strike out. Strike out and I'll pay you X amount of money. So they would pay them out of their winnings. And so people would do that all the time. There were people like Hal Chase, through games all the time. He played first base and he could let a runner get on or maybe not get a runner get on. He could get a hit or strike out. He was playing that game all the time and people knew about it. In fact, in 1918, he got caught red-handed. He was playing for the Cincinnati Reds and Christy Mathewson was his manager, and Mathewson caught him and kicked him off the team. In 1919, he got picked up by Mathewson's old manager, John McGraw. He played for the Giants. McGraw couldn't stand it either because he was doing it there. So he basically told him to get lost, and he was kind of blackballed. But at that time, he had done stuff like that over and over again. He never got banned. He never got kicked out of the league. Pretty much just slap on the hand, if that. So there was really no threat to these guys on trying to make an extra buck. Also, those betting sections like that. In 1917 in Fenway Park, they had Babe Ruth on the mound, the Red Sox did, and they were trailing the White Sox by 2 games. The White Sox were really good that year. They win the World Series. They were building that juggernaut of a team. And they had Babe Ruth on the mound, the young Babe Ruth, their stud pitcher. And all the guys were betting on the Red Sox to win that game because of that. And they weren't. And the White Sox were winning. It was raining, drizzling. The rain was getting heavier. And all of a sudden, the gamblers jumped the fence in right field. And I've been in Fenway Park, so I can see this in my mind's eye. They just jump over the fence, and they don't go out there and start brawling at first. They just walk out in the middle of the field, just trying to delay the game so the rain will be heavier and they'll have to call the game before it's an official game because they don't want to lose their bets. That's how serious betting was. In 1919, before the World Series even hit, the Tigers in the Indians were playing, and you had Ty Cobb was a player manager for the Tigers, and you had Tris Speaker as a player manager for the Indians. They were good buddies. And the White Sox were comfortably in first place. Well, back then, if you finished in the top 3, then each player, instead of just getting World Series winnings or playoff winnings, because they didn't have playoffs back then. So the way you were rewarded for finishing near the top of your division, or you were given money. So if you finished first, you got a certain amount. You finished second in the American League, you got a certain amount. You finished third. Well, the Indians had wrapped up 2, and the Tigers and the Yankees were fighting it out for third place. Well, the Indians said they would lay down for Ty Cobb's Tigers against whoever it was. I don't know exactly how it worked out, but they basically threw a game and didn't get found out until 1926. And when it did, there was a disgruntled guy that had played for Cobb and had tried to catch on with Speaker, and he turned them in. And Joe Wood was involved. And who was that player? I wrote that down right here. I'm drawing a blank. Dutch Leonard, of all people. And he had an axe to grind. So he turned them in. The Tigers let Ty Cobb go. And he didn't finish his career with the Tigers for that reason. Tris Speaker was let go by the Indians. Ty Cobb they were both basically banned from baseball and by Kennesaw Mountain Landis. And then Ty Cobb pulled a trump card, and he had a bunch of dirty laundry on people and basically wrote a letter and said, hey, if you want to play this game, I'll spill the beans on a lot of guys. You don't want me to do that. And so he reinstated them, and basically that's the short story. He got reinstated and caught up with the Athletics, with Philadelphia A's. That's why he finished his career there. Tris Speaker caught on with the Washington Senators, and then later, the next year, he ends up finishing his career with Ty Cobb, playing alongside him with the Philadelphia A's. They were both aged, weren't the stars they used to be. But that's the story. So these guys grew up in that time. There was betting, there was money changing hands, there was games getting thrown. So to think for a second that the 1919 World Series was the first one that ever happened in is ludicrous. In 1918, the year before, the Red Sox with Babe Ruth, and they played the Cubs in the World Series. And there was a rumor around baseball, there were whispers, that the Cubs had thrown the 1918 World Series. They didn't know whether to believe it or not. I mean, nobody was going to investigate it and do anything, so it was just rumors. And the rumor was that the players for the Cubs were asking for $10,000 to throw the series. And so that was kind of in the public domain. And that was what the guys on the White Sox thought. So as the season progresses in 1918, Eddie Seacott, who is the ace, Red Faber was the ace. Eddie Seacott and him were both aces. And then you had Lefty Williams. And you had a young guy named Dickie Kerr and several others on the staff. But those 3 guys made up the bulk of their rotation. Let me back up a hair because this comes into play. The other thing that was going on during that time that we can all relate to, they had a global pandemic. So when World War I broke out, there was this flu strain that was terrible. And so these soldiers it started in America this time. Soldiers left for America and went over to Europe. They took that flu with them, and it spread like wildfire. More people died of that flu and that pandemic than died in World War I. That's how terrible it was. So one of the guys that caught that strain of the flu, and he dealt with it all of 1919, was their ace. The guy that pitched them to the World Series and won the World Series, probably their most valuable player in 1917, and that was Red Faber. And so he has the flu. He can't pitch. And so he's tried, he is sick. He tried to pitch towards the end of the season. They gave him basically the whole season off trying to get well. He couldn't do it, and they had to scratch him from the World Series. So big deal. Why are you telling that to me, Tony? Well, the big deal is if he's healthy, then 2 pitchers signing on to be part of the conspiracy wouldn't have worked as well because Red Faber would have thrown 3. So going back to the 1st of September in 1919, there was 2 commissioners over each league, one over each league, and then there was a main commissioner. They all got together and decided this year to try to make a little more money and get more gate receipts. They were going to go from 7-game World Series to 9-game. And the reason being, again, the war effort in 28 and 1918, I keep saying 20, in 1918, it cut the season short and they had been shorted money. The players have been shorted money. The owners have been shorted money. Everybody had been shorted money. And because of the war effort, Shoeless Joe Jackson, Lefty Williams, had gone and worked in a shipyard in Delaware. Comiskey came out and flat out said, these guys will never play on my team again. They're unpatriotic, blah, 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 and really made Joe Jackson mad. And so he wasn't sure. He had made comment that he will never play for the White Sox again. Lefty Williams felt shunned too. And so there was this discord and there was this unrest. Well, they come back, they kill it that year. They end in first place. They win the pennant on a walk-off hit by Joe Jackson, and they win the pennant. But that whole month of September, they have been talking. It came Eddie Seacott and Chick Candle, we believe, are the two guys that kind of came up with the idea. We don't know which one had it first. And they got together, decided we can make a lot of money. In 1 week of work, we can make more, or in some guys' cases, twice as much as they made for the entire season. So they decided to go for it. So in September 18th, in a hotel room in Boston, Massachusetts, while they're there on the road playing the Red Sox, Chick Gandil has a meeting with a guy. He's a bookie there in Boston, and his name is Sports Sullivan. Got a lot of names here, so I'm gonna keep looking at my sheet. Meets with Sports Sullivan and tells him, look, $100,000, give it to us, we'll throw it. I can get enough guys on this team that we'll throw the World Series. You just got to come up with the money. Sports Sullivan listens, hears him out, and is like, dude, I mean, let me see what I can do. You know, he knows what an opportunity this is. And so some people say it wasn't just Chick Gandil, that it was also Seacott was there, Eddie Seacott, but we don't know. There's a lot of black gray area in this. So real quick, let me go back again. What was going on inside that locker room? It was horrible in that locker room. There were factions of guys. You had the well-educated guys like Eddie Collins. He grew up in a well-to-do family, went to the Irvin School. It's kind of like a high school, middle school thing where rich kids went, and then went to Columbia University, and he was college educated. Then you had Ray Schalk, who was one of the most intelligent catchers of all time. Just a great guy, upstanding dude, but intelligent. After baseball, he was going to do fine. You had Red Faber, who had made a lot of money pitching, and he was a well-honed dude. So they kind of all, that faction right there, Leibold, all those guys, they kind of hang together. In the other side of the locker room, you had guys like Chick Gandil, Joe Jackson. Chick Gandil hung with gamblers, hung out in pool halls, rough around the edges, liked to fight, hated Eddie Collins. When Eddie Collins got there, when he played for the A's, Chick Gandil had slid into second. Eddie Collins slapped a tag on him and broke his nose. He hated Eddie Collins from the time he weren't even on the same team with him. And then you had Joe Jackson, who had no education, couldn't even read or write. And you had Lefty Williams, who was a poor guy from Missouri, just a regular old dude. Fred McMullen, he would fight you in a heartbeat. So you had all those rough and tumble guys. Eddie Seacott, I'm not really sure how he fit in there. Some people like to say he wasn't getting paid enough, and that's not true. We know now that he was the second highest paid player in Major League Baseball as a pitcher behind Walter Johnson. So he was paid. Now, he might not have known that. He might have thought, man, look at Comiskey living over here and I'm living over here. Why ain't I getting paid more? Well, players have been thinking that since the day baseball was made. So, but inside that locker room, there was turmoil. They didn't like each other. They didn't hang out with each other. I mean, even amongst the rough and tumble guys, Lefty Williams and Joe Jackson kind of went to their self. So even that, so they have another meeting. Now this time, everybody's there. And this meeting is in New York City at the Astoria Hotel. And in this meeting is Sleepy Bill Burns, who had been a Major League Baseball pitcher, and a guy named Billy Mahark. And so they're there, and they call them in, they tell them the same story. So you got two different group of gamblers that don't even know the other one exists, and they're playing both of them. So they tell them the same story. $100,000 gets us in. They're excited. They leave the room. They can't wait to go try to drum up the money. They're hitting up different gamblers and different people they know that have a lot of money and might send some money in to get this done. And so they're so excited, but they're having a hard time. And so finally they go to a guy who, believe it or not, we've already mentioned, Hal Chase of all people. He had been let go by the Giants. He had gone out and played in California in the PCL, basically the minor leagues, just to have somewhere to play. He was from California anyways, might as well go out there and play baseball. And they get in touch with him because he has such a reputation. And he puts them in touch with a guy named Abe Attell. And Abe Attell had been a featherweight boxing champ. He was the bodyguard of a guy named Arnold Rothstein. And he basically was a mafia boss. Arnold Rothstein, he'll come into the picture again here in just a second. I'll explain to you how. Arnold Rothstein was a mafia boss in New York City, and he was one of the first guys that was in the mafia that tried to dress nice and tried to come across as corporate. He got in on the prohibition deal and made a ton of money off that. He loved to gamble and he did all this stuff, ran numbers, but he was dead up mafia. In fact, I've wrote some names down. These are some of the guys he was a mentor to. Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, Frank Costello, and Bugsy Siegel. If you think, man, I know that name Bugsy Siegel. He was the mafia dude that started Las Vegas, Nevada, and started doing casinos there. That is his lineage. And this dude was rough, man. You know how you've seen all the mafia movies. Well, that's who they're dealing with, and that becomes the money guy. And he isn't showing up at the meetings, but he is definitely the one funding it through Abe Attell. All 7 of the conspirators are there at that meeting. The only one that's not there, and he's not ever at any meeting, is Joe Jackson. So that gets a little tricky. So he's not there. So they go back to Cincinnati after that series, and they're all in, and they are in, I think it was Chick Gandal's hotel room there in, I'm sorry, they go back to Chicago. They're in Chicago, and here he comes. It's Sports Sullivan. He comes in, he meets with them, and this time he's by himself. And I wrote this down. I want to make sure I get this right. They demand to know who is funding him. And he leaves the room, comes back in a little while, and he's got this guy named Evans. And Evans is representing Rothstein, the same money man that Sleepy Bill had gone and got money from. He was using to get money too, but he had an in-between guy there. Evans was handling the deal. And so Eddie Seacott stands up in front of all of them. Again, everybody's there but Joe Jackson. Eddie Seacott stands up in front of all of them and says, unless I have $10,000 before this World Series even starts, I ain't doing it. I want money up front. And walks out of the room and leaves them all standing there. And they're all looking at each other like, what do we do now? And but that was the smartest thing that any of them did. If you're going to do it, you got to handle it that way, because those guys you're dealing with, they're going to cheat you in a heartbeat, because that's how they get their money. They're crooked as the day's long. And the old saying is, if you're a dog and you lay down with the dogs or something, you're going to get fleas. I don't know. There's something kind of saying like that. But they were laying down and they were going to get some fleas. So anyways, he that night he goes to sleep. There's an envelope underneath his pillow with $10,000 in it. So he gets paid. So they leave Chicago, they go to Cincinnati. Now they go to the team hotel, downtown Cincinnati. People everywhere. You got their whole team there. You got the coaches there. You got all the press there. You got groups of gamblers staying there. And one of the groups of gamblers that's staying there is Sleepy Bill. So Sleepy Bill, he has a meeting with them. And again, everybody's present except Joe Jackson. He is not there. And they come to an agreement that after every loss, there's going to be a $20,000 payment made out, just given to the players, and they'll divvy it up. And so that's the plan. So in that meeting in Cincinnati, the guy leaves. They're all gung ho. They're ready to take this bull by the horns. They're all in. They're going to be rich, and nobody's going to do nothing about it. They're going to get away with it. And even if they get caught, ain't nothing going to happen. They'll just say, we didn't do it. And nobody's going to do a thing about it, because that's the way it's always worked. And so they show up for game one. Saccot's on the mound. He's their ace. He's starting game one. First pitch, throws it right down the middle, called strike. Second pitch, drills the batter in the back. And you think, okay, big deal. It was a big deal at that time. Now, we don't know this for a fact, but it's always been said that was a sign to the gamblers that the fix was in. Go ahead and get your money in. Rothstein's in New York. He's probably paying attention. Back then, they would have these big boards out in like the parks or on Times Square, and they would move the parts around, but there was telegraph. They didn't have it on radio. There'd be a telegraph, and there'd be a guy on the other end of the telegraph right there that would be reading it off. And as he said, strike one, somebody'd put a strike up on the board, strike two, or a hit, the runner on first. So they would do it that way. But that's all they had. And so it would draw huge crowds in these cities wanting to know what was happening in the World Series. So this is where I'm going to stop episode 1. And what we're about to do, we're going to look at the clean Sox. That's the guys that weren't involved. I'm very proud of this set. It's a W514 1919 strip card set. And I decided to build the whole team set. And I believe, I'll look at it in a minute, I think there's 12 in the set. And 7 of the Black Sox players are in there. So 4 of the other players are, and then the manager, Kid Gleason's in there. So tonight we're going to go over the clean Sox, and then on the next episode we're going to go over the Black Sox, and we're going to talk about the games and a little bit about the trial. So hang with me. All right, I'm back. The first player I want to talk about is Hall of Famer Eddie Collins, and he was an amazing player. Played second base. And let me zoom in on this. As you can see, this one's raw, and these W514 strip cards are really cool. They're numbered, but this one is really difficult to see the number. It's down there in the corner. I can't even read it because I ain't got my glasses on. But anyways, I'll show you in some other cards how you can see the number. Well, I've got one right here. This is Dick Kerr. I'm going to show you that next. But see the number right there, number 23. So they are numbered. And what I like about these cards, a lot of strip cards are kind of goofy looking. These, I think, are a lot more realistic. A lot of these photos that these are based off of were Conlon photos. So I'm going to show you one in episode 2. I'm going to show you an old magazine I got with some Conlon photos that match these cards in it. It's really cool. So be sure and check out episode 2. It's going to be a lot of fun. So anyways, Eddie Collins, he's a Hall of Famer. He was the 6th player in Major League history at the time to join the 3,000 hit club. He was a 6-time World Series champ. He really only played in 4 of them. In his later years, he was on the Athletics on 2 of them where he really wasn't playing much. He was an AL MVP in 1914. He was part of the $100,000 infield that Connie Mack had built with the A's. So on some really solid teams. In 1915, or actually 1914, at the end of it, Collins was flirting with going over to the Federal League, and Connie Mack did not like that. And Connie Mack was way before his time. He was the Florida Marlins of the pre-war. He would win. He'd build a team, win, and he'd sell all his players off because he didn't want to pay them more for being good. And so then he'd start all over again. Well, this was one of those years, and he sold Eddie Collins to the White Sox for $50,000. He later became the GM of the Red Sox, and one of the reasons is I mentioned that he had gone to Irvin School, and there was a guy that also went there named Tom Yawkey, and you recognize that name. He was the owner of the Red Sox and hired Eddie Collins to be his GM. And so one time, as a GM, he was also scouting. He went out to the West Coast, went to California, was scouting around out there, and found Ted Williams and Bobby Doerr and signed them to a contract. So he really contributed to Red Sox lore with those two guys. The one black eye has, working with Yawkey was a known racist, and they were getting a lot of pressure to try out some black players when people started integrating their teams. And so they did a sham tryout in Fenway Park one time and had Jackie Robinson and two other Negro League players show up. And they never had any intent in signing them. But unfortunately, the stink of that fell on Eddie Collins a little bit. But even if Eddie wanted them, Yawkey wasn't going to take them. So that is Eddie Collins. Oh, by the way, he died at 63 years old in March of 1951. All right, next guy is going to be Dick Kerr. And here's his card. I've already showed it to you. And like I said, these are numbered. This is one of the cards I believe is in the magazine, the image is, and I'll show you that again on the second one. Dick Kerr, he was found by Buck Weaver. They were playing together during that worker fight deal, and they were on the same team when Major League Baseball shut down. Buck Weaver got word to powers that be with the White Sox, said, you need to look at this kid. So he was a pitcher. He was really short. He was 5'7", and so he didn't have the it factor when you're looking at him. But in 1919, he was a 26-year-old rookie. He won Game 3 by throwing a three-hitter. And at the time, in the newspapers, they were saying that was one of the most dominant games ever pitched in a World Series. And I think the World Series at that time was like 15 years old. So, wasn't that old, but still, that's pretty awesome. And when you throw a three-hitter and you win a game that the rest of the team's trying to lose, and you win 3-0 because you throw a shutout, that's pretty big. So he had a decent career. He kept holding out after every season. He was getting better, and he'd hold out for more money, and Comiskey finally got mad. And, of course, back then they owned the player. And so they basically say, well, look, you can just go kick around and play sandlot ball for all I care. You'll never play in the major leagues. I own you. So finally, he lost 4 seasons to sitting out. But he was playing, and he was making a decent living. When he came back, he wasn't the same. When he was done with playing baseball, he became a minor league manager. So this is an interesting story about him. In 1940, he is the manager in Daytona Beach for the Daytona Beach Islanders. And he has this 19-year-old kid show up. And the kid is a pitcher, also plays outfield and hits. He was a do-it-all guy. And his last name was Musial. I've probably heard of him. His name was Stan Musial. And Stan Musial's there playing for him. He's newly married. They're having trouble making ends meet. Dickie Kerr and his wife invite Stan and his wife to move in with them. Stan's wife is pregnant at the time, and so they're very young, about to have a baby. And so Musial, on an August night in 1940, they're playing in Orlando. He's going after a ball. He's playing outfield, and that night, and he catches his spike on a sprinkler head, kind of like Mantle did, and he crashes to the ground on his left shoulder, his throwing shoulder, and hurts it really bad. And he has trouble pitching the rest of the year, and he's so down in the dumps, he thinks his career's over. He's a has-been at 19 years old. And Dick Kerr talks to him and says, no, you're good. You're a great hitter. Keep your head up. Work on your hitting. You're a good enough hitter to make it in the major leagues. So that got Musial's his confidence back up. So he kept playing, and of course, you know the end of that story. But while he's there, his wife goes into labor. Dick Kerr and his wife, I think her name was Cora, throw him in the car, drive her through town like crazy, like a bat out of hell. They get to the hospital just in the nick of time, and Musial looks up to him so much. He's a mentor. He's somebody that means a lot to him, a father figure, that Stan Musial that night in the hospital when their baby's born names their firstborn son Richard after Dick Kerr. So that is the Dick Kerr. Oh, and it even goes further than that. In 1958, Dick Kerr's aging. Of course, they're not rich or anything. He's a lifelong baseball guy. It gets word to Musial that he doesn't get word, but somebody tells Musial that, you know, they're struggling. Musial, they're living in Houston. Musial goes to Houston, buys a house, and signs the deed over to the Kerrs and gives them a house. So that was what kind of person this man was, to make that big of have that big of an influence on one man and his wife. To have them do that for you tells you what kind of person he was. Dick Kerr died at 69 years old in May of 1963, and he was just a few months shy of him and his wife's 49th wedding anniversary. That's Dick Kerr. Before I get to the next clean sock, I want to show this Eddie Cicotte. So I've actually got two of these. I've got this one, and upgraded. I'm going to show you the other one tomorrow night, but this one had hole punches in it. A long time ago when people would collect, they would stamp their name on the back or maybe put a decorative hole punch to claim it as theirs, and this is one of those. I ended up buying another one without the holes. I want to give this one away to somebody that watches my videos. So when you watch this video, comment whatever you're going to comment. I don't care. But put hashtag Black Sox. That's my code that you watched my video all the way through and that you actually listened to me. Didn't just fast forward and look at the pictures. So do that, and I'm going to do a random drawing, and I'm going to give this away to somebody who watched these two videos. I'm going to show this again on episode 2. But do that, and you'll get in the drawing and maybe win 1919 W4 514 Eddie Cicotte. This is the next clean sock. It's Ray Schalk. He is a Hall of Famer. He grew up in Central Illinois, was a very intelligent catcher. If you look at his numbers, you could argue he doesn't belong in there. His batting average wasn't that good. He was small for a catcher, 5'7", 155 pounds, but he was very athletic. He was the first catcher that would run down the line and back up first base or back up bases. In fact, there were times where he would sprint out and surprise runners and cut a ball off between around shortstop, between second and third, and tag a runner out without them knowing he was there. He got called up in August 11th of 1912, one day before turning 20, and got his first hit off Chief Bender, for all people. But he credits the Kid Gleason, the manager. I'll talk about him in a minute. He became the manager there in 1919, but he had been a longtime coach on the team, and he credits Kid Gleason with really working with him on his catching and making him the player he was. To this day, he has the record for catching no-hitters. He caught 4. He had an 18-year career. He has the record for double plays by a catcher with 222, and he's second in assists with 1,811. So great catcher. Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb both named him to their all-time teams as the catcher. So that speaks volumes on what kind of player he was. He knew something was wrong after game 2 when Cicotte had crossed him up all the time in game 1, but when Lefty Williams kept crossing him up in game 2, some people say he assaulted him and tried to fight him in the locker room, but he knew something was up. After playing, he became a coach like so many of these guys did, and I believe he became the coach at Purdue University. He died of cancer at 77 years old on May the 19th, 1970, and he was married for over 50 years, but he was a good dude, Ray Schalk. The next clean sock is going to be Urban Red Faber. So his real name was Urban. Red was a nickname, had red hair. He was from Iowa, had a 20-year career, and he is a Hall of Famer and was a great pitcher. In 1917, he won 3 games in the World Series for them, and he was their ace. He didn't make his debut with the White Sox until 1914, but pitched 20 years with the White Sox, the only team he ever played for, and he was the last pitcher to ever throw a legal spitball. When they outlawed spitballs, they allowed the pitchers who made a living off that to continue to be grandfathered into being able to throw that. He won 254 games, and his last season was 1933. He was a lifetime smoker. He only chewed tobacco when he was pitching, so he could throw that spitball. Him sitting out and getting sick with that flu-like virus is what sunk them in the World Series. If he's healthy, there is no way in the world that they could have thrown that World Series, because he would have pitched 3 games and he probably wins 3 games, or at least 2 of them. And so it probably would have kept them from thinking they could pull it off. So Ray Schalk said that to the end of when he died. He always said, if Red Faber doesn't get sick, then we win that World Series and doesn't get thrown. I had a similar thing happen to me in high school. My senior year, our catcher got mono, and we had won the state the year before, and we were, on paper, I thought we could win state again, but when our catcher went down and we had to shift people around, it kind of messed us up. So in my life, I've had something, but this cost guys their careers because it opened the door for that. Anyways, when he got done with baseball, he sold cars, he sold real estate, he bought a bowling alley, he coached a little bit. When he got in the mid-1950s, he started working for the Cook County Highway Department there in Chicago, and he worked on a survey crew until he was almost 80 years old. He died at 88 years old on September 25th, 1976, and that's Red Faber. All right, the next one is going to be the manager, and this will be the last one. His name is Kid Gleason. So this image right here was a Charles Conlon image, and I'll show this on episode 2, and I've got it in that magazine. It's really cool, but you'll get to see what the real image looked like. His name was William J., and they called him Kid because he wasn't that big a guy. He was 160 pounds, 5'7" when he played, but he always looked younger than he was, so they called him Kid. He grew up in the coal regions of Pennsylvania, really hard scrabble life. His dad was a coal breaker. He started as a pitcher in the major leagues in 1888 for the Phillies. In 1895, he moved to second base. He was playing for Baltimore at the time, and he was on a team with a lot of pitching. He could hit, so they just moved him to the infield, and that happened a lot back then. In 1896, he was traded to the New York Giants and played for the legendary John McGraw. So he learned under several managers, so he was a really smart guy, good leader of men. Baseball Magazine credited him. That was a big publication. In fact, that's the magazine I'm going to show you on the next episode. Credited him with inventing the intentional walk. When he was playing second base against the Cubs, they had bases loaded, up 9-6. They were in the 8th inning with 2 outs, and the Cubs' best hitter was up to bat. Kid Gleason called timeout, walked to the mound, told the pitcher to throw 4 wide pitches, told the catcher, and basically had him throw it wide like they do nowadays with intentional walk, put the runner on. He walked in a run, made it 9-7. They ended up winning because they got the next batter out because he wasn't that good a hitter. That's why they did it. So very similar to what Buck Showalter did with Barry Bonds. He was the first one that thought of that. So on April 26, 1900, he, George Davis, and Mike Grady, 2 of his teammates with the Giants, were walking to the Polo Grounds, saw smoke coming from a burning building. They ran in and saved a few people, helped the fire department get people out before they died. So he became a local hero, and he was promoted. Or I'm sorry, before that he was a coach with the White Sox for I forgot to look that up, but for many years. Ray Schalk credits him with teaching him how to catch and he would get there at 9 a.m. for a 3 o'clock game and work with him on his catching. Happy Felsch, the center fielder, that was amazing center fielder. I'll talk about him on the next episode, but credited him with teaching him how to play center field. So great man. Can you imagine you walk on a team that you had helped build and help teach these guys how to play, and you can't wait to get your shot. And you finally get your shot, and you're cleaning it up in 1919, your first year, and then this crap happens. I mean, he could have won the World Series, and they had built a team that they could have been a dynasty like the A's had been with Connie Mack on several occasions where they just won 2 or 3 in a row. They had already won in 1917, so they had young players that were getting better. They had several Hall of Famers on the team. Ray Schalk and Red Faber and Eddie Collins are all in the Hall of Fame. Shoeless Joe was destined to be a Hall of Famer. Buck Weaver and Eddie Seacott were possible Hall of Famers. So the team was loaded, and they just kind of flushed it down the toilet. But unfortunately, Kid Gleason died on January 2nd, 1933. 5,000 people attended his funeral, including John McGraw, Connie Mack, and Kennesaw Mountain Landis. He was very well thought of. So that's Kid Gleason. Catch me on the next episode, and don't forget, comment, do hashtag Black Sox, and you'll be entered to win the Eddie Seacott W514 strip card. Thank you.